Okay, lesson 4.4, part 1, completing the square. Completing the square is a process for solving quadratic equations. In lessons 4.1 to 4.3, we looked at solving quadratics by graphing and by factoring and by using square roots. This is simply another method or another tool for solving quadratics. And again, I know it's been a little while since we've been at school. So just to review that a quadratic equation is any equation in that form ax squared plus bx plus c. I'm going to jump over this. The first thing we're going to look at is some kind of step-by-step instructions on how we have to set these up. So the first thing we have to look at when completing the square is we have to make sure that our leading coefficient, or a, this value in front of x squared here, has to be 1. So if it's not 1, we're going to have to do some dividing. So for example, if I had 2x squared plus 5x plus 6, I would have to divide all of this equation by 2 so that this leading coefficient 2 over 2 would now cancel and this would become 1. So if you do need to divide to make that 1, this would obviously be 5 divided by 2. This would become 5 over 2 or 2.5 if you take 5 and divide it by 2. And 6 over here would become 3. So my new equation would be 1x squared plus 2.5x plus 3. Now, most of the time when we complete the square, we're going to be given an equation that does have a equals 1, as we do here, which is kind of nice. So once we have a is equal to 1, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at b. And we're going to take, and this is just kind of a set rule, and this is really what we're going to be looking at in this part 1 or intro lesson, is taking b, dividing it by 2, and squaring it. So in this particular example up here, we're going to take b, which is negative 16. We're going to divide it by 2 and square it. And when you take negative 16 divided by 2, you end up with negative 8. And we square that, and we end up with 64. So this number is really the number that we're going to use to complete the square. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole process. That's going to be our next video Zoom lesson. But what I want you to really work on right now is figuring out this value. So that value, 64, is the value that we're going to add right here so that we can use the completing the square process. So in this particular case, we're going to add it right here for C. And that is going to allow us to complete the square. So the term to add to x squared minus 16x is 64. Computer's kind of slow, sorry about that. So looking at maybe another example or two, if we want to solve this equation by completing the square, the first thing we have to do is, again, make sure that our leading coefficient is 1, which it is. You'll notice that they took this constant term and put it over here by itself. Normally, we would have 0 over here. You're going to move your constant to the right-hand side. So in this case, it's already done. Our constant term is already on the right-hand side. If it wasn't, you would have to move it before you complete the square. But I'm not really worried about that right now. What I'm looking at is this value. So we're going to take b, we're going to divide it by 2, and square it. So b divided by 2 squared is really the formula that we have to use for all these examples. So we're going to take 5 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. Squared is 6.25. So 2.5 squared is 6.25, and that is the value that we would add to both sides. So that's really the value that I'm after in this particular lesson. So as you move forward, you're going to be doing some practice on IXL. I'm going to jump over and maybe try to show you what that looks like. So here it's asking you, here's an example directly from the IXL K9 that you'll be doing. It's asking you to complete the square. It just says fill in the number that makes the polynomial a perfect square quadratic. That's where you're going to take that b divided by 2. I'm not sure if I can write on here. I don't think I can, but you could take the b value, which is 16. You divide it by 2, which is 8, and you square it. 8 squared is 64. So in this particular example, we would add 64 to this equation to complete the square. Now this, again, is just the first step. We're going to finish the process in our next video or next lesson. But there's just a very quick introduction to completing the square. I would like you to follow the instructions on Google Classroom and complete this IXL K9 to at least 70.